Everybody, and welcome to our Women in Health Tech month for the podcast The Only Way is Ethics, and this is panel number 4. I would like to welcome all of our guests, Kaye Reynolds, Claire Dixon, Lisa Simmons and Sam Neville. Thank you ever so much for your time taking. I'm really excited to do this panel. We've already recorded one panel already, so we're on to our second recording. So thank you for joining us. What I'll do, I'll just go around each panelist, each guest, so you can introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, and just give us a bit of background about your journey into digital health, and what your roles are now. If we could do that. So I will start with Claire. If you could, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Dean. So Claire Dixon, the CEO and co-founder of Neurora. With Neurora, we're developing a biowearable platform for the relief of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it's been a long road for me to get into entrepreneurship and to health tech. I started off doing an engineering degree, went straight into consulting after that for many years, transitioned into operations in academia and kind of stumbled into this world. Really started meeting entrepreneurs and realized they were my people in terms of being very mission driven, kind of relentless in their pursuit of kind of advancing technology for good. And then so jumped into this 7 years ago. At the time, or still, I guess, our origins are very much a hardware company. So we started off in the brain-machine interface space with a neural electrode that was spun out of the University of Calgary here. We pivoted to PCOS just over 2 years ago. And like many women who find themselves in health tech, I draw a lot from my own personal journey. So spent almost a decade in fertility treatment. And so, it's very personal to me, what we're doing. And as we learned about PCOS itself and the burden of disease, realized that we couldn't just solve it with a medical device, that actually the burden of disease is partly caused by the system of care today in terms of things like the information gap, the lack of support that's available. And so realized that we needed to provide a much more holistic and fulsome approach, and hence kind of why we're also wrapping around a digital platform.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Lisa.
Thanks, Dean. That's really interesting, Claire. It's really interesting to hear other people's journeys, isn't it? So I'm Lisa Simmons. I'm a paediatric speech and language therapist by background. So I qualified and started to work in the NHS. I think it was the start of 2010. And I loved it. I'm still a speech therapist now. I still practice. I love working with children. And I loved doing the job. And I worked in quite a lot of different specialisms, but quickly found my calling in hearing impairment and deafness. So I worked with all ranges of ages, from babies actually right through to adults, although I was more paediatric focused. I did work with adults at times. My last post in the NHS was out of Alder Hey as part of a specialist regional network. And as people know, Alder Hey is quite advanced when it comes to technology. And there were lots of studies. We were looking into using like telehealth before it was a real thing. People weren't really using it, but because we were a regional network, there were times when actually delivering sessions or check-ins remotely was actually beneficial to us, but also to parents and to children. And then there was discussions around the use of apps and how we could use other technology to support deaf children, deaf adults, how we could improve the input that we were providing, the intervention, and just trying to make things, a better experience for patients, carers, and for the service, really. We're always trying to be more productive, aren't we? And from there, kind of sparked an interest in health technology and a whole world that I didn't even know existed. And so from the NHS, moved into health technology. I think it was in 2018 I made the move, which was a big step, leaving the NHS. But then, I was working for a health IT company, and that was implementation, so supporting the implementation of health apps and software into NHS organisations. And then from there, became a clinical safety officer. And that was interesting because when I went to do the first course, I didn't really know what that job even meant. It was I attended the course, and I kind of came out quite baffled about what I was supposed to be doing. That was in 2018, so it was a while ago now. And then that's what I do now as my main job. So I'm a clinical safety officer, but still remain clinical on the side because I do enjoy that work as well.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. Sam.
Thanks, Dean. Lisa, totally feel your pain. We were all laughing when you said clinical safety officer work then. I'm Sam. I'm a registered nurse by background for 33 years this year. I fell into digital. So I did surgery, I did risk management, I did orthopedics. It's my background. But then I was asked to implement electronic observations on departments. Loved it, could see the benefits of technology. That was in about 2017. We went through merger. I stayed in digital. It was fantastic because I could see what else needed to be done. So since then, I've now developed a clinical team across the organisation. They're all trained as clinical safety officers along with myself. So we have a whole team for that. And I've also got a regional role for 2 days a week. So I'm the regional CNIO as well. And I think networking I've picked up is my power source, really. I just network with anybody that's interested or interesting, like you ladies on the call, which is really good. So of that, I'm also RCN Digital Steering Group for Digital Nursing Forum. I've just joined the Highland Marketing Board as well, advisory board, so doing work with them. It is about getting out there, raising your profile. And we've got networks across the region as well, including an AHP network, just listened to you earlier, Lisa, which is fantastic. So it's actually getting other people to take ownership and get some autonomy, not just doing it all yourself.
I totally agree.
I'm still here.
Totally agree. Yeah. No, thank you for that, Sam. And Kaye.
Hello. Thanks, Dean. And yeah, I agree with what everyone's just said. It is really interesting, isn't it, listening to other people's stories of how they've got to where they are. And I think we've all got here very different methods, but more often than not, you hear people say they kind of fell into it accidentally, which I always find quite interesting. So I'm a registered nurse by background. I worked for 10 years as a chemotherapy nurse. Absolutely loved it. And then I had an accident at home, which has left me so I'm not able to kind of stand on my feet for many hours a day like was required in my previous clinical role. So that's how I kind of ended up in a digital role. One of my other clinicians kind of pointed out, with my attention to detail, as I like to call it, being pedantic, other people call it, but my attention to detail is actually quite suited to that kind of risk management and governance sphere. So I kind of found my second calling, if you like, in digital clinical safety. Equally, though, within the first few months, kind of thought, what am I doing? I haven't got a clue. Have I done the right thing? I miss being clinical so much. How could I go back? And yeah, lots of emotions, and it was a real struggle. And I thought, I cannot be the only person that is doing this role. There must be others. I'm the only one in my organisation, but there must be others out there. So I thought, well, let's all talk. So I started off with quite a small group of other clinical safety officers I kind of found, reaching out through different networks. And we decided it'd be a good idea if we kind of set up a monthly call where we could just kind of all group together and talk about all things clinical safety, share our problems, share our learning. And I still have in the invite today, because it's quite appropriate. You can also read this as a shoulder to cry on, because actually it's quite nice just to have somebody there to talk to. And I think that kind of community and sharing is so important. So in February this year will be 2 years since I set up Coffee and Chat. And this is a monthly forum that we meet on Teams, and we get in excess of 100 people on the call each month now, which is fantastic. I think it just shows that there's that need for people to kind of talk and share and learn. And what I found really valuable is not keeping it exclusive to one area. So it's not just NHS, it's not just industry, it's not just independent. Everyone comes together and talks, because we all come at it from a different perspective, and I think that learning is so important. And just try and bear in mind that, you know, we're all here to achieve the same thing, and that's to make technology safe for our patients. So let's do it together, because surely safety in numbers, you know, we can, between us, we hopefully come up with the best option. So I run the Coffee and Chat forum, all the admin bits and pieces outside of work. So I currently work as a lead clinical safety officer within an NHS organisation, which is a full-time role. In addition to that, I am studying part-time for my master's degree in digital health. I'm just about to embark on my research project and dissertation. Yay, I can't wait to be finished and have a little bit of a life back, which will be amazing. So close to that one now. Interestingly, and this will come as a shock, my research is on clinical safety, so I don't think anyone saw that coming. Also sit on the Digital Health Network CSO Council as co-chair, which is a really good forum to kind of, again, network and share and learn. And then also within the BCS, the Clinical Safety SIG Special Interest Group, also sit within the leadership team there. So I like to kind of get my tentacles out there, kind of see what's going on, be nosy maybe, but actually I just think, yeah, like Sam said, it's really important to see what other people are doing, because that's the best way really to learn. And we can learn from when things go well, and we can learn from when things don't go so well. And they're just as valuable lessons that, you know, if we can transfer them and save one potential risk or issue, then I think that's the job well done. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kaye. And before I forget, what I normally do is just crack on now, is that I don't introduce myself, because some of the people out there won't know who I am. So I will. So Dean Mawson, I'm nurse by background, 33 years, same as Sam. Actually, Sam, listening to your introduction, there's lots of similarities there. Orthopedics as a background. 33 years of a nurse next door in Barkinghaven and Redbridge for all of my career. Spent 18 years in digital health. I worked for IMS Maxim's EPR supplier for 11 of those years on their product team as a clinician, delivering training, supporting implementations, working with design development teams, QA, application support, you name it, the whole gambit. So well rehearsed around that whole design development, and have watched with interest the growth of digital health over those 18 years as well. Crikey, we just about had phones, didn't we? Mobile phones back in sort of like, you know, not so long ago in relation to that. I also sit on the BCS Clinical Safety Special Interest Group Leadership Committee with Kaye. I host The Only Way is Ethics podcast as well, and we support regulatory compliance. So I'm independent now as a CSO and support the digital health community with regulatory compliance. So thank you everyone for your introductions. Really interesting to see sort of, obviously, you know, varied backgrounds and different interests and the stories, and it's always good to see. So from sort of like from Claire and your personal interest, which is something that we see a lot within, probably internationally, but I only know from my experiences in the UK, is that there are a number of either startups or SMEs, where you speak to the founders, and it's all, you know, a lot of it is due to personal experiences. I know there's another one out there, Careology, in relation to Paul Landau and his team, and that's all through sort of, you know, and Paul won't mind me saying, sort of through personal experiences that he created a cancer support sort of platform. And Claire, you know, you've already sort of stated, and it's interesting you saying about in developing this medical device, or this hardware then onto software, that it gives you the opportunity and looking at the holistic sort of journey or experience within what you're doing, and being able to do that, because sometimes we do, don't we, get very, very blinkered in relation to that. And then the people that sort of fell into digital health, it's almost like I have this vision of someone tripping over the computer and sort of like, you know, oh, I'm in this sort of like realm. And then sort of, you know, different experiences, and sort of, you know, Lisa, you were mentioning before about sort of like AHPs and sort of like, you know, SORT and your passion for that, which is absolutely fantastic. But also, and we will, you know, come on to discuss that around sort of the diverse backgrounds and making sure, you know, and the importance of making sure that there is diversity out there, and that we support that really, and move that forward in what we're doing. So you're all here as women in health tech, in relation to what we're doing, and that, as I've found from doing our session, recording our session yesterday, and, you know, some of the research that I did, that, you know, it has its challenges, but I don't want these panels and the discussions just to be about the negatives in relation to that. There are lots and lots of positives as well, and we need to celebrate women in health tech, and I think it's really important that we do that as sort of part of these panels. So if we, because we do tend to find ourselves, don't we, when we have discussions, we pick out we try and pick out the sort of like the gripes and the sort of like, you know, and we go down that line. So if we are tending, like we did yesterday, in that direction, I'll try and bring it back into the sort of, yeah, let's all sort of like have big smiles and celebrate why we're here in the first place. So we'll do that. But I will start off though with sort of, you know, the discussions, and like to get you guys, really, because it's all about you guys, and starting that discussion off around something that sort of Kaye sort of shared in relation to our preparation for this, which I think sticks with a lot of people, and I've heard it in my experiences as well, is around the perception of women in tech roles. As, you know, people being very dismissive, and I know, Kaye, you mentioned, and, you know, you could say misogynistic in relation to a female, and you wouldn't understand because it's too technical in its approach, which saddens me, but obviously an interesting observation yesterday was Jess Morley talking about, if she walked across campus into the science and technology building and walked into the room, there's all the computers, etc., she said 9 times out of 10 she would not find a woman in there. It would all be men, or, you know, men, boys, etc., students in there, which I found quite interesting. So it'd really be good to get people's sort of, you know, viewpoints in relation to that, about those challenges, and maybe just going around sort of your experiences, if someone wants to kick us off.
Shall I just provide a little bit of context to that kind of
comment
first,
absolutely.
Dean, if that's okay?
Yeah, so no, totally.
And obviously,
totally.
Yeah, this is not saying that this is the day-to-day experience, because it definitely isn't. But I've had occasional experiences where I have been spoken to. Well, you're just a nurse, so you wouldn't understand, or this is a bit technical for you, let me think how I can dumb it down a bit to explain, and comments such as that. On the converse, I've had people that have been really, really positive and like, oh, but you bring a different perspective to it. I wouldn't understand what you done when you were a chemotherapy nurse. So how can we kind of share our knowledge and work together? So it is a real mixture, but I think it is such a shame. And it really, I suffer with imposter syndrome terribly. 9 days out of 10, I feel like I don't know enough. I shouldn't be doing the job I'm doing. So when you kind of have that confirmed by an outside source, it kind of just makes it a little bit more difficult to overcome, I've personally found. So yeah, it was just a few comments in context around discussing how a system works, system architecture, things like testing controls, and it was just quite interesting to kind of get that perception. So yeah, it would be really interesting. I'm certain I'm not the only one to have had such comments. But it'd be great to hear how other people have responded, because I've always struggled, like you said earlier, Dean, remain professional. And I have one of those kind of temperaments where I can kind of react and then think afterwards, I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't appropriate, or it wasn't professional. So I'm learning as I'm getting older. But it would just be great to hear if other people have kind of had that experience and how they dealt with it.
I think kind of we'll likely all have our stories. I mean, for me, it most often turns up in the context of seeking investment. So a lot of traditional medtech investors are older white men. And, you know, I've had the situation where they've said, first comment, they're keen to get their comment in first after I finish pitching. And the comment is, you're lying, PCOS doesn't exist. You don't know what you're talking about. And so obviously that's not, it's more on the clinical side than technical side, but same principle. And the challenge with that is they're speaking from a position of authority, right? Because of, you know, how society views them. And with confidence. And you know, I've struggled with this because, you know, there's being credible and being liked. It's really hard as a woman to be credible and liked, right? Like all the research says so. And so, you know, I still don't know how to react in that situation, because it's very destructive, and it's not just dismissing, ruling them out, but then everybody else who hears that then moves to their opinion. So I think kind of, you know, I don't have the answer of how to deal with it constructively and professionally, because it always puts me on the back foot when it's that blatant. I mean, I will say, however, that I'm very optimistic about the future. I presented to biomedical engineering undergraduates like last weekend, and the room is not the room that my engineering class looked like. You know, there were 15 women out of 400 in my class. This room was representative of our society, truly, and incredibly engaged, incredibly well informed in their questions. So, you know, it will change, but I think kind of, unfortunately, that power and authority and wealth is kind of concentrated, perhaps, in folks that are carrying that bias, right, with them, and affecting, you know, how we're able to progress solutions.
Can I just, before we sort of go on, I'm just going to throw a statistic in now. So 1% all funding is given to women that pitch. I don't know if anyone knew that, but and I was absolutely shocked that that is the case. But that just shows, Claire, doesn't it, that sort of the attitudes in relation to that, because that statistic for me is just absolutely shocking. And it's one that I didn't know, that was told to us by Liz Ashell-Payne yesterday. And that got everyone sort of like gasping in relation to that. Sorry, Sam, I think you were posed to.
Yeah, I was going to come back on that from personal experience as well. When I first started in digital, I did come across somebody a gentleman who tried to baffle me with technology language, because being a nurse, you don't know what you're talking about. Admittedly, I probably didn't know what he was talking about, which is why I had the conversation and said, you want me to explain this to the nursing staff, you need to put it in language I can understand, so then I can reiterate. And he was a bit aghast that I had actually challenged him as well. But it helps to have allies, because there was other allies, other gents in the room that actually went, yep, totally see where you're coming from. We've asked you to be part of this. We've asked you to help with the staff out in the wards. And they supported that request. And I think since then, it's been really good. Everybody's like, right, I need to speak to Sam in this way. But then I've also learnt the language slightly more as well. Like you say, Kaye, you learn as you go along, don't you? And you pick things up. And it's much better. And now I think within our service, it's probably 50-50 male, female, which is really good. So we've got allies on both sides for both genders, really. And even within the senior leadership team, it's 50-50. So it just shows that women are coming up there. Women have got that knowledge and intelligence. It's just keeping the confidence and, like you say, that imposter syndrome at bay. It's brushing it off your shoulder, which is difficult to do. I totally agree with you on there.
What I find interesting is actually when you attend things like Kaye's Coffee and Chat or anything else where there's, lots of people working in digital health, there's a lot of women. There's a lot of women, and there's I don't know what the statistics are around the workforce in the NHS or in health in general, but there's a lot of women holding up the NHS.
Yeah.
So, when you're thinking about people then moving into digital, being, whether that be being a CSO or a CNIO, whatever the role is, there's a lot of women in those roles. So it's an interesting concept when you actually look at technology being probably dominated by men, and actually health technology is going to have a lot of women involved. So there's got to be a change. And I think that it's really nice to step into these meetings where there's women who've got each other's backs, and everybody's had some experiences at some point in their career, whether it be in health tech or whether it be in tech in general, whether it's been in health in general, because I had experiences that weren't so great as a clinician around, I suppose, imposter syndrome, but being made to feel in a room like I didn't know what I was talking about and my input wasn't valuable. And a lot of women have had those experiences, but I think what I've noticed, especially in the last couple of years, is that there's more and more women out there wanting to do what, like Sam said, and network and support each other. However, and I know Dee mentioned this before, so it might be kind of preempting a conversation you were going to bring in, but we do need to have men involved in that as well. It's not just about women all talking amongst themselves. It's about men being involved and backing women up, and like Sam said in that example, being in the room and actually being challenging about it and saying, well, actually, it doesn't matter whether somebody's a nurse by background or whether they're an engineer by background or whatever. We've all got skills and we all have a part to play in this, and we need both sides. So what's really valuable is having men supporting us and us working together, because that's the only way that we're going to really change things and also make the differences that we want to make in health tech moving forward. So I think things like this are great, where yes, Dean, you've organised and led it, but actually bringing different women together who've not met each other before from different backgrounds, but also maybe reaching an audience that we haven't met before, because you are a man. So, sometimes you need somebody to break that wall down for you, don't you, and lead the way.
Yeah, and it's great you're saying that, Lisa, because when I came up with the idea and sort of like, we need to do this, it wasn't that sort of like, oh, my plan is that we sort of like, have a panel of women and the only people that are going to listen to this is women. It's sort of like, if you were that short-sighted and sort of like, and that's your plan, then like I said on yesterday's, well, that's a different podcast and a different forum and a different sort of, if that's what people want and that's their sort of like, it's all about collaborative and working together. Like, and well, I know as a man, I mean, coming up in my career, Sam, you just put that stat up, 76% of the workforce is female within the NHS. Everyone that influenced me, and this was during, like, I've thought about this, sort of doing my research, some of my research for the panels and stuff. Everyone that influenced me within my nursing career were all female. In relation to, I look back at every step of my journey and my career, and they were all female. And I have the one biggest influence in my life, my mum next door. She lives with us, and she is, you know, and as I said yesterday, you know, she comes in at 4'11", but I tell you what, you would not mess with her. And I don't. I'm 51, and I still sort of, you know, no chance would I, sort of, you know. She's a powerful woman, and has, like, you know, has done a lot. So they're the things to celebrate in relation to sort of, like, you know, and there's a lot of experience out there, isn't there, within our sector, and within the workforce that we need to utilise. It's interesting, Claire, picking up on what you were saying about being both credible and liked in relation to that. And I'll sort of, am I going to be contentious here? Is that because as a woman, to be credible, do you think people are seen to be maybe too feisty or too confident in that approach, and sometimes it comes over as being a bit sort of, I don't know, in that respect?
I think women are just judged more.
Okay.
You know, I think we're just held to higher standards. I think, you know, the adjectives we used, I think I used feisty with a friend last week, and she stopped me and said, like, even that, right? Like, even the adjectives we use are kind of
feminine,
coming from a place of a power dynamic, right? So, you know, I think there's most of us, I don't know, I don't want to talk for everybody, but a lot of us go through a process of women of having to let go of being liked by everybody, because it is truly impossible to be a successful woman and not attract negative vibes from certain parties. Like, I hate that, right? And I love the sense of community and camaraderie in this space, right? Because I think we're all driven by something that's, like, bigger than ourselves and really want to make an impact and a difference, and that pushes ego out the way. But, you know, I think it obviously, I'm knocking 50 as well. Like, it's a journey, right? Like, it's hard when you're a young woman not to get caught up in that being liked, but when you're put in a situation like pitching, you know, when you're put in anything that's like a competitive type situation, or a, you know, artificially competitive type situation in some instances, then all of those things are like, you're constantly judged and held to these set of impossible standards. And I think that's kind of the fundamental difference. And we see it playing out in politics, we see it playing out in personality, like celebrities, right? Like the way we describe different people and their actions and how they show up. So I don't know, that's kind of, I think it's just endemic.
I think not to digress too much, but I don't know if anyone ever watched that I don't know if it's a documentary, but called No More Girls and Boys. I'd recommend you watch it. So okay. I don't want to go too much into this because it's a little bit of a tangent, but just picking up from what Claire said. So I've been interested in, I've obviously worked with children and in research into that kind of stuff, and the language that's used with girls versus boys from an early age. And you mentioned STEM earlier as well, Dean. So what they did, some like experiments where they'd have babies. So often babies, you can't often tell if it's a boy or a girl. So they'd have a baby and they would dress them as a boy, and then they'd send somebody in to play with them. There'd be a mixture of toys around. If they were dressed like a boy, they would pick building blocks, they would pick cars and trucks.
Yeah.
If it was a girl, if they were dressed like a girl in pink, you know, like a girl, I'm doing it now, but if they were dressed in pink, then they'd be picking up the babies and the dollies, and they'd be doing hair. And the language, as Claire said, is very different. So, you know, girls get called bossy. Oh, don't be so bossy. And it happens all the time. You don't really call boys bossy. So that language is used from a very young age. The clothes that the children wear, you know, what girls are praised for. I am beautiful, you know, whereas boys it's I'm strong or whatever. It's very different. And I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, because I do it and it's really difficult not to, and to be aware, but that carries through. And then when you get to be an adult in a role, you're trying to break years of this language, and you are, as a woman, as a girl, brought up with this overhead of to be like, I'm supposed to be not bossy, I'm supposed to be pretty because that's what my clothes tell me, I should be this, I should be that. And then to do anything else, then you do meet this resistance because you're not meeting what society kind of expects of you. And I don't know how you change that, but you know, working together and explaining these things to men without wanting to be patronizing in any way, because men haven't experienced that. So it's things like this that help, and to just bring it out into the open and shine a light on it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to also like recognize our privilege in this conversation as well, because I think we talk about tuna moments in our house, right? So, you know, my husband is a 70-kilogram white male, middle class, right? So, you know, we talk about kind of that friction of like everything being designed for a 70-kilogram white male in life. You can't see it, right? You can't see that at all because it's invisible to you. You know, whereas obviously we experience a little bit of that friction going through life. So I say, you know, it's like a tuna moment because we're both in the ocean. You're a tuna, I'm a lion, right? Like, of course I can feel it, you can't, right? But also, you know, we're all white, highly educated, well informed about healthcare, right? And so, but because we experience that friction, I think we have more empathy with other diverse groups as well, who experience that friction in different ways, and sometimes more profound ways than we do in, you know, across racial, ethnic issues, across gender diversity, sexual orientation, etc. I think because we feel some of it, we can then empathize better with others who also feel forms of that friction.
I think it leads us quite nicely on if we're looking at that. So Lisa, you mentioned sort of STEM. And for those of you, I always have to have this sort of like written down in those in the audience and listening don't know. So science, technology, engineering, maths in relation to STEM. And we were talking sort of discussing yesterday around the opportunities for girls and young women in relation to, you know, promoting careers and opportunities within these sort of within the sector and within those sectors in relation to that, because as we know, sciences, and as we discussed, sort of like, you know, it's boys do the science things and the sort of like, and those sort of the physics, the chemistries, and the sort of all of that. And there's a tendency that sort of, you know, girls do more of the sort of like the arts and the literatures and the sort of like all of that type of stuff. And we need to get away from that, don't we? And we need to have sort of like, you know, careers opportunities. I think Claire, you mentioned around sort of like, you know, going into sort of like, you know, different sort of organisations and doing that sort of thing. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I'm potentially going to be taking up an opportunity in my old secondary school in sort of like, you know, in relation to that. And I think it's an absolute must. and you mentioned sort of like the diversity, Claire, and different, backgrounds, etc., and and those opportunities. Not everyone is as lucky as sort of we are in relation to that. But we, again, and like sort of these forums, is to try and sort of like push that forward and get people sort of like thinking about what we can do in relation to that, because I think it's really important. It's the next generation, isn't it? Because we are where we are at the moment. We are pushing forward at 100 miles an hour with digital health, and if you want to talk about inclusivity, exclusivity, digital maturity, then we're the ambassadors for that, and we need to push that forward. Sorry, Sam.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in on the back of your STEM conversation, because I think some of it starts at schools. I mean, I do a lot of the ambassador works with health ambassadors, and
I know
as
you
well.
do, yeah.
And they all think I'm going there to say, come to do nursing. I'm like, no, come to do digital. Do digital stuff. But sometimes the curriculums don't allow that mix that people want. So, like you're saying, you're either humanities and arts or you're STEM. You get funneled. And that's the trouble. There's no in between in some of the curriculums, the way it's set up. So I think if people had an opportunity to do a science or technology as well as a humanities subject, because you need to download the brain sometimes. It can't all be that tech stuff. You might actually get more people coming in to do it rather than wait until later on in their like late 20s or whatever to do that technology stuff or going into uni. And if you look at the uni stuff as well, it's all one thing, isn't it? There's no downtime from coding, or I'm not a technologist, sorry, it's from what you're doing in that hardware space.
No, absolutely.
Everybody needs a bit of art and science, is what I'm trying to say. And I think we need to start further back than right here and now, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, Sam, thank you ever so much. And I know you have to go. Thank you ever so much for
apologies.
Your time. So we will continue. And it's been absolutely fantastic having you on, Sam. And we will speak soon.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you all.
All
Bye,
right.
Sam.
You too. Bye, Sam.
Thanks. Bye, Sam.
I was just going to add to that. I hope it's changed since I was at school, but when I done my A-levels many years ago now, I was the only girl doing chemistry and the only girl doing maths at A-level. So in my school.
Gosh.
So,
wow.
yeah.
I mean, interestingly, I did do a mix. So I took my A-levels did my A-levels exams in 2000. And I did music, English, biology and chemistry. So I did do a mix.
Yeah.
But it was really uncommon. There weren't any crossovers between. I was the only person doing that. There were similar people doing the music, performing arts, English, and then there was the people doing chemistry, biology. But I was the only person who crossed over the two groups.
Yeah.
That was me. I was maths, physics, and biology. Were mine. So absolutely. And there was no teachers, there was no advocate saying to me, well, have you thought about doing one of the sort of like the arts or something sort of like completely different in relation to that. And I suppose it's really interesting actually listening to Sam, that there isn't that sort of like, I didn't really think about it like that, but there isn't that crossover, or there isn't people promoting to say you should be doing sort of like a bit of both in relation to that.
Yeah, I think I don't know, I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but if you think about the role of AI and how basically anything that's kind of repeatable, you can put in a textbook, AI can do it better than a human now. I really think that multidisciplinary education and that intersection is like the way to go. Like if I was advising my son, he's a little bit way off university right now, but I spoke to somebody doing a degree which combined music and engineering, and I was like, you are so smart, because you know, it's those intersections, and crafting out that role for yourself is really going to future-proof your career. Whereas if you follow a very traditional path, more and more of those jobs are going to be obsolete because of technology. So yeah, I think it's got to be the way to go if you're you know, doing your school right now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think it's really important that we you know, and like I say, we're ambassadors, and we need to sort of like, you know, try and promote that, and sort of like and push that forward in relation to sort of like women in health tech. And coming on to leadership roles within, because I think women in sort of like health tech, we are seeing obviously more women in, which I think is absolutely fantastic, in sort of in leadership roles. And I think on your journeys, and sort of like, I mean, Claire, you know, going up sort of like, you know, through the ranks, being sort of like, you know, CEO, and I think all of us in sort of like within our careers, how has that been, and how's that journey been in relation to progressing? And do you feel that, you know, there's sort of hurdles or sort of stumbling blocks, etc., due to the fact that you're a woman as opposed to a man in doing that?
I'm happy to say that I don't feel like I'm personally in a leadership role within my organisation. So
Okay.
I don't. Now, whether that's just the way I feel, and
Mhm.
maybe the role is perceived as being a leadership role, I'm not sure. But I think potentially, as we've all discussed so far today, those kind of historic experiences build up our perception now. And I think maybe because I've come out of environments where I haven't been able to kind of have any autonomy and display any leadership, that now I may be doing it, but I don't consider it as that. I just consider it as being a decent human being. And I think there's that kind of that dichotomy between what you would classify as a leadership role and what you may perceive as that individual in that role. Personally, yeah, that's where I struggle with that myself, and the kind of the perception of the role that I'm in. And like I say, others may disagree and say, no, it's definitely a leadership role. But you're saying there, Dean, but I still...
no, I wouldn't, just to let the audience know, and sort of Claire and sort of Lisa on this. I mentor Kaye and her team within their organisations, and I would totally say you're in a leadership role as part of your organisation, and people are looking to you for direction, and are looking and will be looking to you, especially with you've got a, if you don't mind me saying, sort of like, you know, there's a, you know, an EPR deployment coming up, and you've got sort of digital health sort of like systems like coming into the organisation, and people will be looking for you to lead in relation to clinical risk management. What is the approach, etc. Because I think, and sorry, and I am going to sort of talk about the CSO role here, and apologies, Claire, for sort of like, you know, in relation to that. So a clinical safety officer, Claire, I don't know how much you know about sort of the CSO role within the UK, but it's in relation to managing sort of regulatory compliance, the NHS safety standards, and have a lot more in their role than people realise. And that there is an expectation. Yes, there is the letter of the law in relation to the standards around you must, you should, you must, you should, all the way through. However, people are expecting you, will have an expectation that you lead, that you have a knowledge, that you will give advice and guidance, and that you know what you're talking about, and that you are there to give direction in relation to that, and in support of, and an advocate in support of that safety argument, etc. So there are many attributes within that totally sort of like, you know, I would argue in certain aspects that most CSOs are leaders in what they do, because lots of time they are the only CSO within their organisations. Therefore, they are responsible for clinical risk management, regulatory compliance, etc. within their organisations. Therefore, they have to lead in relation to that, because people are looking for direction. Sorry, just sort of
no.
Sort of
I guess
in that,
when
and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing. But then it also comes with its challenges, doesn't it? And I think it comes with its challenges even more if we go back to the start of our conversation around you're only a nurse and you don't have a technical background, or how are you ever supposed to understand this because you're not a man, etc. That just adds to that, you know, how difficult it can be in some of those roles.
It's a good point, really, because I think, like Kaye said, I wouldn't consider myself in a leadership role. However, you are in lots of situations where you have to be that person. You are leading, so your role, you might not say that you're a leader, you might not feel like that's your job title. However, the things that you're doing as part of your role, you're in a position where you are trying to lead, and that has, at times, I have found difficult, because I don't class myself as being in a leadership role. So then you're in situations with, you know, other professionals at different levels within organizations, and it's sometimes, I find, challenging to pitch myself, and I think that is, again, something I've always struggled with, of how to, and it probably going back again to what Claire said earlier, but how to pitch myself, and I that kind of being friendly but actually trying to get the job done. And it's a balance, and actually I think women sometimes are just used to be trying to get people to like them and be friendly, and sometimes that's not really going to work, is it? So it's a really interesting discussion, actually, because I think that there are lots of CSOs out there going into that, but probably lots of women in health tech in general who are quite on their own, quite isolated. There's not a lot of other people doing a similar role or other women around them. So again, that networking, I think, is really useful, isn't it, to have other people to speak to and, you know, share experience of how they've overcome some of these barriers, or the imposter syndrome that I think a lot of us have felt. But I'd be really interested to hear Claire's experience of being, you know, CEO, and some experiences that you've had, actually, because that, to me, is not a role I would ever have gone after, because I think that I would just crumble under the pressure. So you know, as soon as somebody says, and you know, it's a leadership role, I think it's not for me. But actually, Dean's, you know, explanation is makes you, you know, reevaluate that a little bit. But I'd be really interested to hear about Claire's experiences, actually.
Yeah, and like meeting you two just for the first time today, like I saw you as leaders in your field. Like that's why you're here, right? You are playing that leadership role. You know, I'm CEO, but like it's a small startup, right? Like I'm not CEO of Pepsi or something, right? I don't have hundreds of thousands of people working for me. You know, I do think, however, for a lot of my career, I was more comfortable sitting in the number 2 spot, you know, being that supporting role. And I think I just got to the point where I was like, you know, I don't have imposter syndrome, right? Like I intentionally, even my introduction, Lisa, the same as you, right? I have a master's in engineering from Cambridge. I have an MBA from Harvard, but I don't say it because I feel it's obnoxious. But like, even that I know is part of this kind of gap between how, as a woman, I'm comfortable presenting myself and how an equal peer as a man would do that, right? So I'm very conscious of that still, but honestly, like as soon as I said no, like enough is enough, I'm just gonna, take this step, right? Like and just trust in myself. I'm much more comfortable and fulfilled in my career because I'm not, fighting against, being in the wrong spot, right? And it's I think it's about, wanting to make the greatest impact, right? And if that means saying yes to the opportunities that present themselves to you, even if you are nervous that, in my job, I have to learn things every single week, right? I can never know everything, do everything this week that I need to be successful next week. And that's what I love, right? But like embracing that, embracing failure, embracing experimentation, embracing constant learning, like that's part and parcel of being a leader. And I think, you ladies, like just from this like very brief impression, yeah, of course you're leaders, right? Of course you're leaders in your field, in your organizations. It's not about titles necessarily, but that does grant, being the COO versus the CEO for me, it does grant you a little bit more permission, right? When you take those titles. So, it does actually help. So as opposed to trying to have the influence you want and being constrained. So yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point actually about the title associated with the role, because in my mind there is kind of there is an associated title with a leadership role, and clinical safety officer isn't one of those roles that I would associate. However, when I think to how Dean's just described what we actually do, then on reflection, yes, I can see how that may be perceived. But that's really interesting you said that, Claire, because I think it is that perception between a title and the connotation associated with that title versus actually what we do. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and also picking up something else that Claire said about learning and knowledge. And I think, I'm sure this is the same for men, so it's not saying that this is only women, but I think sometimes we feel that we should know all the answers. And if you're going into a meeting and people are asking questions, especially if you're the only woman in a meeting and holding a title where you're kind of being looked to for information and guidance, sometimes you feel like you should have all the answers just straight away to hand, and actually over the last couple of years, I think what I've got better at is not putting too much pressure on myself that I should know the answer to everything, especially when you're a clinician stepping into health technology. We're here because of the value in our clinical experience and our, what that brings, not only the fact that you are familiar with workflows, but also as a clinician, you've got that, working with patients and empathy that you've developed, because actually those are skills, that the soft skills that actually really work sometimes in health tech. So bringing all that, and actually sometimes just, we don't have all the answers, but we're quite capable of learning them. That's how we got into these roles, because we were interested in learning something new, and we keep learning, and technology changes so quickly anyway. So it's a really interesting point actually, and I think reflecting on not having to know everything, I think sometimes that's where imposter syndrome comes from, isn't it? They think that we should know everything, and actually I've been in meetings with men, and I've felt that they do know everything and I don't know everything, and I think that's been the struggle. But I think I've, over the last couple of years, felt a bit more comfortable in actually they don't know everything and I don't know everything, but we can meet in the middle and help each other out.
Yeah, and I've got experiences of that, and I think we all have to a certain extent, haven't we, Lisa? Where sort of like, I remember coming out of sort of like meetings and I'm like, why did I say that, or why did I make people think that I'm sort of, and then they're like, oh, Dean, you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's like, no, I'm going to go and ask all these people and sort of like and get all of that information and then bring it back to you. And I don't want you to have the impression that that's my sort of like forte. And it's like, yeah, and you learn quite quickly, don't you, that it's like, you know, yeah, I can't come with everything. And I used to hate saying sort of like, you know, well, I don't actually know, but I know someone that, you know, that does, or I can get that information, because it made me feel, I was like, oh God, they're going to think I'm really stupid, or sort of like, you know, I'm not sort of able to do that. And I completely understand that. And it's like, you know, but now I'm totally open and sort of like honest to say, no, I'm not expected to know. And I think that comes with that, again, coming back to that CSO role, isn't it? I think it's quite difficult, and you hear from quite a lot of clinical safety officers that are like, you know, there is an expectation that we know everything about everything when it comes to a product. When you're sitting in front of people and they're like, well, come on, tell us, you know, what is the safety argument? And when, you know, because they just want to tick the box and get it through the door. And there's that expectation. So it's a lot of pressure in relation to that. Yeah, and I think, Claire, from your sort of like, I know you say like, you know, it's like, you know, just see it as a startup, but there's a lot of, you know, we work with, I think we all, well, myself and Lisa probably more than Kaye, but work with sort of like a lot of startups in relation to that. And I think it's a lot of pressure on sort of like startups within sort of like to be successful and to push forward, because, you know, we know the statistics around, you know, those startups that don't make it. You know, there's a high percentage, isn't there? And, you know, I suppose there's a lot of pressures, as opposed to if you say, oh, well, I'm CSO of a big corporate. Well, they are successful. Do you know what I mean? They are a big corporate because they've become successful. So they are sort of, you know, they're sat there sort of like, you know, and there's different pressures. But it'd be interesting to sort of like, you know, what are the things that sort of like, I don't know, keep you awake at night, or sort of like, you know, in respect to.
Oh my goodness. Well, I was going to first of all say, it's like, it's important how you define success. So, you know, we're still working to close the gap on our device to our first regulatory clearance. You know, we've started to make a little bit of a footprint digitally, like closing that information gap. But honestly, like when I go out and I talk about what we're doing, the space we're in, what often happens is one or two people will come up to me afterwards and they'll say, like, this is the first time they felt seen and heard. Like they've been living with this condition for 10, 20 years and like they felt dismissed and diminished. And that for me, right, like is kind of the gas in my tank, right? Because, you know, I know that we're already making a difference, right? And it, you know, not you know, not kind of global domination or anything, but like every single individual that you touch in that way that feels more empowered to like live a healthy life, the best life they can with a chronic condition, like that's a huge impact. So you know, I think the art of start is sometimes just don't give up, right? We've been around for 7.5 years. We pivoted just over 2 years ago to this use case, and we just refuse to give up. You know, we don't waste money on football tables or whatever it is those cool kids do, but you know, we just don't give up because honestly, you know, like I said at the beginning, like this is now personal for me, right? And we know we can have an impact in a space where people are just left hanging with nothing. Like the standard of care hasn't changed since the 1960s, you know? So yeah, just keep going. Just stubborn.
No, and that's great, absolutely fantastic. We are going to have to wind up pretty soon. The session. It's been absolutely fantastic speaking to all of you, and I'm so looking forward to our other two sessions because I'm a bit like a sponge and I'm learning every day, and these are just absolutely fantastic and gives us a lot of ammunition as well for us moving forward. But as those of you that have watched the podcast, there is one ask of you all before we go. Is to put you on the spot for one last time. Is we'll sort of go around the panel and just ask you, from our discussions on the panel, what would be your one sort of, for everyone listening, what would be your one takeaway in relation to sort of like what we've discussed, or piece of advice, or sort of nugget that you can go? And I'll start with Lisa.
Oh no. I think I think that the point kind of I was talking about earlier, which came out of what Claire said, really about learning, and just we're all learning, everybody's learning, no matter where you are in your career, right at the start, in the middle, coming to the end, and that's how we, you know, get better in our jobs, and everybody's got to do that, so we can't know everything. And as a clinician, you know, you've got to know what your strengths are, and you've got to know, you know, where your limits are, and it's got to be the same in health tech. And I feel a bit like, as a clinician, I was good at that. I need to get better at it, working in health tech, you know, knowing I don't have to know everything, and I can go away and take the time to look it up and learn.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Lisa. And Claire?
I would pick up on where Kaye and Sam led us to start with, in terms of the power of community. And that's a community with, you know, peers, but also, you know, I'd say champions like you, Dean, right? People who are Trojan horses because they bring us together. And, you know, I think there's a lot of divisive talk in the world, and kind of, I think, kind of having people like you as an antidote to that. So thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you, Claire. That's very nice of you. I wasn't expecting that. No, that's great.
Yeah, you were.
Kaye.
You were fishing there, Dean. We could tell. Only teaser, yeah. Can I have two, please? Can I have a personal one and a professional one?
Yeah, go on.
Dean's face like, what's she going to say? No, just personally, just listening to Claire talking around her personal experience as someone who's also suffered with polycystic ovaries for the last 20 plus years, and always been dismissed by predominantly male GPs as, you just need to go away and lose some weight and everything will get better. And that isn't the case. It's just really reassuring to hear that there are people out there that are still fighting and still championing for these types of conditions that, as Claire said, being told by senior medical professionals that it doesn't even exist. Those of us that live with it know that it exists, and we know how painful it can be and how debilitating it can be. So thank you, Claire. So personal perspective, thank you. That's amazing. Professionally, I think it's what you said, Dean, around that, taking a step back and just changing your perception around what leadership actually is. And it isn't necessarily, Claire mentioned, it's not necessarily the title. It's about what you actually do and how you enact and how you perform your role and present yourself. So hadn't really thought of it that way. So from a professional perspective, that's been really, really useful for me to go away and think about. So thank you ever so much.
Oh, thank you, guys. And it's been an absolute pleasure. I think I can, and what I can take out of this is sort of, no, it's really nice. Claire, I don't take compliments very well. I think it's the nurse in me, unfortunately. I get very sort of like, in relation to that. But no, thank you, all of you, for your contribution. I think these sessions are really valuable, and I hope they are. I hope that everyone listening gets a lot out of these, and we can sort of move this forward as well with your support. It'd be really good. In relation to that. So thank you ever so much. Thank you to everyone for listening to panel 4 of our Women in Health Tech month on The Only Way is Ethics. You can find us, as you already know, on Spotify and YouTube, and we look forward to our next session. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.